What's up everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of fixing up this old Mark II Golf and making it ready for the MOT or inspection, whatever you want to call it. In this one we're gonna do a bit more maintenance related items. I'm gonna be changing out the automatic transmission fluid. I have no idea if that's ever been done before. And just a bunch of miscellaneous parts, filters, and actually also I'm gonna do some servicing to the ignition system. I'm gonna be changing out a bunch of parts right there. Partly because it feels good to have done that, and also it can actually help with the emissions, so I want to be as prepared as possible for the MOT, so that's why I'm changing out a bunch of ignition parts as well. So without further ado, let's get right to it. And a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video series, oljemagasinet.se, where you can just type in your plate number and it'll automatically show you the recommended fluids and all of the spare parts for your car. And if you type in the code EJOAUTO10 at the checkout, it'll give you 10% on everything. So make sure to check them out if you live in Sweden. The first order of business is to replace the automatic transmission fluid, and in order to do that I first need to remove this metal splash guard. Some of these bolts had definitely seen its best days, so what I'll probably end up doing is replacing them with brand new bolts with the same thread size. Some of these screws were hard to reach, but I switched to my 3/8 ratchet and then I managed to get a good hold of them. A lot of junk trapped in here, so I will probably clean it real good and give it a quick coat of paint. Before I go ahead and loosen up the oil pan, it's really important to clean around the seam because there's a lot of loose dirt around there and you don't want to get that into the gearbox. WD-40 can actually be used as a degreaser or a cleaning agent if you don't want to deal with harsh chemicals. So that's exactly what I'm using right here, just spraying it on and scrubbing away. To avoid spillage on the floor, I'm using the widest container that I could find to drain the oil in. There are only 4 screws holding on the oil pan to the transmission, and in order to not distort the pan itself, I'm going to be loosening up the screws in a crisscross pattern little by little. So we got a small problem right here. As we can see in this corner, it's a bit corroded where the seal actually comes into contact with the gearbox. And in order for me to have a chance on it sealing, I will probably need to use some RTV in this corner right here. It's not something you would want to do on a gasket type like this, but in this case I pretty much don't have a choice. But before I go ahead and remount the seal and everything, I need to clean off this loose corrosion right here, and then I can fill in the voids with some RTV. The strainer filter and the gasket is also getting replaced, and that is held on with 2 Phillips screws. There were some gritty metal flakes in the strainer, and that's not something you would want to see, but it's also definitely not the worst that I've seen. This kit comes with an oil pan gasket, strainer gasket and a new strainer filter. You could actually go ahead and clean off the filter itself if it's not damaged in any ways, but if you're gonna replace the new gaskets, you might as well order the new filter as well. Of course, I cleaned the oil pan with some degreaser and a brush, and I will follow that up with a quick layer of paint just to make it a bit more aesthetically presentable. I also went ahead and replaced the M8 bolts that holds on the oil pan. With the oil pan torqued to spec, it's time to refit the splash shield, and of course I cleaned that off really good as well. Next up, while we're still under the car, is to drain out the old engine oil. And actually I did replace the engine oil not too long ago. I actually haven't been driving the car much at all, but I consider that to be an engine flush so that we have fresh new oil in the system right now. Next up is to remove the old dry rotted drive belts so that I can replace them with new ones. And this was actually more time consuming than I first would have thought, because the power steering pump belt was really stubborn, or actually the tensioning mechanism was really stuck. The tensioning bolt was so stuck that I actually couldn't get it to move at all while on the car. So I decided to remove it completely and with some heat try to wiggle it loose on the bench. The threads were damaged, so I decided to re-thread the stud right here. The threads for the tensioning bolt was surprisingly still in an okay condition, so no need to re-thread that. And then the alternator belt. These belts were really dry rotted and old, definitely in a desperate need of replacement. And regarding the timing belt, I actually did inspect that and it did not look nearly as bad as these belts, but it's probably due for replacement, but that's for another video. Now, the belt for the power steering pump was actually a little bit shorter than the original one, so I didn't manage to get it on even when I loosened up the tensioning as much as I could. So what I needed to do was to remove the pulley for the power steering pump, and then I could get the whole belt assembly on. Some blue Loctite for the pulley screws. And there we go, all the work underneath the car is done, so let's put on the wheels and lower it to the ground so we can start working from the top. Let's fill it up with some fresh oil from oljemagasinet.se. Filling of the automatic transmission is done through the hole for the dipstick. And the automatic transmission takes DEX 3 automatic transmission fluid. Now let's move on to changing out a bunch of ignition parts, and hopefully this will also solve my lumpy idle. I'm just marking everything as it were originally, then I'm just gonna duplicate that with the new parts so that everything gets connected the right way. The rotor only fits one way, so it's a direct swap. The old one, the contact point on it was really worn out, so it was definitely in need of replacement. Before you remove the old spark plugs, it's definitely a really good idea to blow out around the holes so that any crap doesn't fall down into the cylinders. I always find it a little bit scary to remove old spark plugs on an old car like this that you don't know the history on, because you never really know if the threads are going to be damaged, and if they are, you're in for a bad day. But in this case they weren't, so that was a really good relief. However, the spark plugs are super old, so they definitely need to be replaced. But before I go ahead and refit the new spark plugs, I need to clean around the hole once more, because as I were unloosing the old spark plug, some more junk came loose. So this time I need to vacuum it up since the cylinder is exposed. The new spark plug wires are really straightforward to fit. The longest wire goes to the spark plug furthest away from the distributor, and the shortest one is obviously for the one that is closest. Moving along, it's time to replace the air filter that's been in there for who knows how long. I don't know about you guys, but I think it's so satisfying to replace old, worn out parts on an old project car like this. It just makes me feel so good. Last thing to do before the test drive is to replace the power steering fluid, and it actually takes the same kind of ATF fluid that the transmission takes, and I will probably repeat this process a couple of times off camera until I have fresh, red, clean ATF fluid in the system. There we go, finally done. I can actually take this car out for a test drive. Feels really nice to have fresh fluids and filters and just going over some maintenance stuff. Yeah, I'm just gonna take it out for a test drive right now and see how it feels, and hopefully we will be ready for the inspection. Wow, it runs so much more smoothly on idle. It did not run like this before, I can tell you that. Let's try to put it in gear and go out for a test drive. The transmission worked just the way it should, and there were no leaks after the test drive, which is just wonderful to see. So the test drive actually went really good. The car felt great, and I've checked all around the car and there is no leaks whatsoever. The brakes did what they were supposed to, and I've also topped off the automatic transmission and the engine oil, so we're pretty much good to go. I've checked all of the lighting on the car, the headlights and the rear lamps and all of that stuff, so I feel ready for the inspection, but we will actually do that in the next episode, so you'll have to wait until then. We will also probably clean the car because it's been sitting in the garage for a very long time. So hopefully next time it'll pass the inspection. That would make me super happy after all this work. So until then, have a really good one, guys. See you soon. Bye.